So, welcome to the first lecture on the Zohar. Before I begin teaching Zohar, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and my relationship with the Zohar, why I want to teach it, and what this will be and what this won't be. First of all, those that have already watched my channel and other things know that I'm Saul Weinreb, modern Orthodox, ordained rabbi, but although I don't practice as such, I just love to learn and teach Torah. The Over the last few years, I've spent a lot of time teaching a lot of major classics, major Jewish classics, most notably the Mor Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed of the Rambam of Maimonides, and the Kuzari of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, both of which were major works of Jewish philosophy that heavily and deeply influenced the way we think about and practice and believe in Judaism to this day. Both of those works that I just mentioned were written during the time of what's well known as the Spanish Golden Age, or the Golden Age of the Jews in Spain, a time of tremendous productivity, a lot of scholarship, etc. But there's another very important work, influential work, that also had a tremendous amount of influence. It's pretty impossible to overstate the influence that this work had on the development of Judaism and the way Judaism is practiced today and the way people understand concepts within Judaism. And of course, that work is the Zohar, which appeared in 13th century Spain from the circle of Kabbalists that studied mysticism together in Spain for centuries, and eventually produced the work of the Zohar, which became the founding text, the primary text of all Jewish mysticism to follow. Of course, there was mysticism prior to the Zohar, but the Zohar really became the foundational work of Jewish mysticism. My own personal relationship with the Zohar goes back many years. I as when I was yet in my yeshiva days, when I was in high school, because of, to a large degree, because of my family's background in Hasidut and Hasidism, the Zohar was always referenced to as the Holy Zohar. There was always quotes whenever I studied works from either, from all sorts of Hasidic works. And I was the type of student who liked to look up things at the source. So I would, of course, get my hands on a copy of the Zohar and look it up and try to read through it. Eventually, I got my hands on the Sulam, which was a Hebrew translation, a Hebrew commentary. So it enabled me to read it in Hebrew rather than the unusual form of Aramaic with which the Zohar is written. So I tried to understand it. And it, of course, had this sense of mystery about it. Eventually, as I progressed in my studies, I would try to get my hands on books of the Arizal and his school. That was the Rabbi Isaac Luria, the famous founder of what's known as Lurianic Kabbalah, which was, of course, based on the Zohar, and study some of those works. A lot of that was done on my own until I met a scholar who was a Chabad scholar in where I lived in Baltimore, an older man who was very well versed in these things. And we sat many, many nights, many hours studying Hasidut and studying Kabbalah and studying Zohar together into the wee hours of the morning many times, and trying to get a handle on this great work and this important and influential work. Over time, I tried, over the years, I tried to systematize it and understand it. And eventually, over the decades, my heart and my mind went to a more rational understanding of Judaism, a more rational understanding of philosophy, and the study of mysticism kind of became secondary to me. But I had a strong background in it. It was something that interested me, but something that I kind of lost touch with over the years. and it doesn't really represent the way I look at the world. So when we study Zohar together, what I'm going to tell you a little bit is what it won't be. I'm not a Kabbalist, I'm not a mystic, and I'm not here to teach you secrets of how the world works and how God works and how we relate to him. What I am here to do is teach you the Zohar so that you can understand the intense influence and the incredibly powerful influence the Zohar has had on our religion. Whether that's for good or bad, that's up to you to decide. But or somewhere in between. But it's almost hard to imagine what Judaism would look like if not for the Zohar. And we're just going to sit together and study from the beginning, and you'll get a chance to understand, even from just tonight's lecture, what I mean by the immense amount of influence the Zohar had, which things that we almost assume are basic parts of Judaism that really aren't. They really go back just to the 13th century when the Zohar came out and started influencing the way we practice, the way we believe, and so on. So, with that introduction, it's time for me to begin. And I'm going to begin. The Zohar begins with an introduction. Incidentally, the very fact that there's an introduction is one of the proofs that those that don't believe in these ancient origins of the Zohar immediately point to the introduction, because no other rabbinic text begins with an introduction. Only the Zohar does begin with an introduction, which is something which was common in medieval Spain. But nonetheless, regardless, I'm not here to discuss the history of the Zohar, the origins of the Zohar. There's plenty of scholars that discuss that in other sources, and that's not the purpose and point of what we're learning here today. So the Zohar begins, and as I always teach, I like to read the text, and I'm not talking about the text, but I'm reading the actual text, and then I will translate and give a little bit of commentary and background on my own. And whatever we're going to learn about the Zohar, you and I are going to learn together as we read the Zohar ourselves, because I want you to learn from the primary text, and I want you to get the true and as honest a feel of the Zohar as possible. So here we go. Ribi Chizkiah Pasach. Rabbi Chizkiah began his discussion as follows. Kisiv, it says in the verse, Kishoshana bein hachochim. And this is a quote from Shir Hashirim, from the Song of Songs, the chapter 2, verse 2, as a lily among the thorns. Mon Shoshana. Who is this Shoshana? What is this a lily referring to? Shoshana is generally translated as a lily. Do Knesset Yisrael. The Shoshana refers to the people of Israel, the congregation of Israel, or the community of Israel. And now, right away, we can see from the Zohar the way the Zohar draws so much from the traditional Jewish texts. The writers of the Zohar were intimately familiar with all of Talmud, both Babylonian and Jerusalem Talmud, and intimately familiar with the Midrashic literature that preceded it, and constantly drawing on images that are found throughout the Talmud. What the Zohar does with those images is very different, as we shall see. But this comparison of the Shoshana, of the lily, to the community of Israel is clearly a reference to Medrash Shir Hashirim, to the Medrash that is written on Shir Hashirim. So this goes back to probably, I guess, around the 3rd century, which has an extensive discussion of how Israel can be compared to this Shoshana, to this lily. But let's see what the Zohar does with this comparison. Ma Shoshana de'ihi bein hachochim is basumak v'chivar. Just like the Shoshana, the lily, that is found among these thorns, has in it red and white. Uf Knesset Yisrael, so too the community of Israel, ispa din v'rachme, has din, which is justice, but din here it generally means a strong form of justice and mercy, and rachmin and mercy. Of course, these themes of rachmim and din, of mercy versus judgment, as being a dichotomy, has its origins in Chazal, its origins in the rabbinic literature, but specifically here of the red and white color of the lily is a reference to, of course, the verse in Isaiah, and in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18, where it says, come, let's reach an understanding. Yomar Adonai, says God, kashanim, if your sins will be like red, like shanim, like crimson, kashelag yalbinu, they will become white like snow. Miadimu katola, if they will be red like a worm, katsemer iu, they will turn white like wool. And as we know, of course, the famous idea that the strap that was a part of the service in Yom Kippur, on Yom Kippur in the temple, there was a red strap that would turn white, which indicated that the people were forgiven of their sins. So this is clearly a reference to that idea that red as a representation of sin and white as a representation of cleanliness, of holiness. So here you have the people of Israel having within them these two qualities, sumak v'chivar. Ma, and then it continues the comparison. It says, Ma Shoshana ispat lesar olin, just like the Shoshana has 13 leaves. And this is interesting because there are commentaries on Shir HaShirim, the traditional commentaries, often understand the Shoshana, the word. If you look in the Metzudos, for example, and other places as well, they translate Shoshana as being from the root, a Hebrew word shesh, which is six, because they looked at the lily and saw that it had 6 leaves. But here we have the Shoshana having 13 leaves. Uf Knesset Yisrael, similarly, the people of Israel, isbat lesar mechilon derachme. They have 13 attributes of mercy, the sacharin law, that surround it mikol sitra, from all sides, just like the petals of a flower surround the inside of the flower where the color is, where the red and white is. So here we have a clear reference to the 13 attributes of mercy with which God guards Israel. And right away, we see something very fundamental here that you wouldn't notice if you just read this cursorily. You have to understand that what this is stating here is that the Knesset Yisrael, Israel, is surrounded by the 13 attributes of mercy, which is interesting because it is only in the Zohar where the attributes of mercy are represented as specifically related to protecting Israel. The attributes of mercy are not mentioned this way in the Talmud at all. They are mentioned as the way in which God manifests his mercy towards the world, the attributes of God being merciful, Racham Uchanon, merciful and graceful, etc. But they're never the 13 attributes of mercy as they appear in traditional rabbinic literature appear as the way that God relates to the world. Nowhere is it related to the way that God relates to Israel. So again, we find the Zohar making a concept which is a new concept in the rabbinic world. This concept that God's attributes are uniquely a way with which he relates to Israel specifically. And think about the ramifications of that idea and how that would change the trajectory, almost the trajectory of Jewish thinking, Jewish philosophy, and the way the average Jew thinks about the way that God relates to the world. So uf Elohim dahacha. Okay, so then the Zohar continues and looks at a word. And now this again is something new and revolutionary. Again, you can run past this, but not quite realize the significance of this. It says the Elohim dahacha, the word Elohim, which is mentioned here, right? And this is talking about the second time it mentions the word Elohim in Bereshis bara Elohim. And in the beginning, God created that word Elohim, right? So it mishata de idkar, from the moment the word Elohim is mentioned in Genesis, apik tleisar teven, there's 13 words l'sachara l'chneses Yisrael u'lenatrala. There's 13 words before the word Elohim appears again. So you have the word God appearing, and then if you go to the verses in Genesis, you'll find Bereshis bara Elohim. In the beginning, God created. Then it says, Eis hashamayim v'eis haaretz v'haaretz ha'isa tohu v'avo, and the land was desolate and so on. V'choshech al bnei tehom v'ruach, and the spirit Elohim of God, mirachefes, was hovering over the water. So those words, Eis hashamayim v'eis haaretz v'haaretz, etc., is 13 words. So surrounded by Elohim, or surrounded by God, those are the 13 attributes of mercy. And the Zohar then says that symbolizes the 13 categories of mercy which God surrounds the people of Israel. Again, confining the people of Israel and surrounding the people of Israel by God already from the time of creation. Now, again, over here, this is really important because the Zohar is again using something which has also never really been part of traditional rabbinic literature, and that is the idea that we can see hinted in numbers of words and patterns like this in the Torah. We can see these grandiose ideas of God protecting the Jewish people specifically, and so on. So again, we get the things that are being seen in the verse are things that are simply not found within the rabbinic literature prior. I'm not saying that there's no place in literature where words are counted, but presented in such a way, this is something new, and this is something that Zohar introduces into Jewish thinking. Ulubatzar idkar zimna achra, but then it mentions the name Elohim again, right? And this time, amai idkar zimna achara. Why does it mention it another time? It says begin la'afka chomesh olin takif and desachrin l'shoshana, because protecting that lily, there are 5 more leaves, 5 stronger leaves, presumably, I guess, green ones that surround the lily that give it even more protection. Now, what are these 5? If you look again in Bereshit and you continue, you'll see the next Elohim is after 5 words. It says Vurach Elohim. It says Mirachefet al Pnei Hamayim Vayomer Elohim. So there's 5 words again between one mention of God and the next mention of God. Those 5 are 5 more protections. And what are these 5 referring to? They are referring to V'inun Chomesh Ikrun Yeshuos. These are considered salvations. Now, this is clearly a reference on many of us might be familiar with the 4 languages of Geula, the 4 languages of redemption from the book of Exodus. V'yotzesi, and I will take you out of Egypt. V'yitzalti, and I will save you. V'ga'alti, I will redeem you. V'lakachti, and I will take you. Those are the 4. But then there's tradition that there's a 5th, and that is V'hevesi, and I will bring you to the land of Israel. Now, it's interesting because we don't really know what the origin of that 5th language of Geula, that 5th language of redemption is. It's not found in the Talmud, although there are some versions of the Jerusalem Talmud, not in the standard version, which have Rabbi Tarfon telling us that there is a 5th cup, that he drank a 5th cup on the Seder night of Passover instead of just 4, representing the 5th language of Vehevesi. But this is not found in our Jerusalem Talmud, only in some manuscripts. And it seems to have popped up possibly sometime around the time when the Zohar appeared. So it wouldn't be unreasonable to assume that this tradition of the 5th language really was originated from the Zohar. There's even versions of the Rambam in which a 5th cup was somehow inserted, but in the old manuscripts, in the reliable manuscripts of the Rambam of Maimonides, it's not there. So here we have again the Zohar giving us this tradition of 5 languages of redemption, 5 types of redemption, which is another new thought that's being introduced into Jewish thought. The Al Raza Doksiv, and on this, regarding this secret, it says, Kos Yeshuos Esa, I will raise a cup of salvation. Yeshuos, the language of salvation, those 5 languages of salvation that were just represented before. Kos shel bracha. This dakos, this is the kos of bracha, the cup of blessing that we say, well, we say a blessing on when we make kiddush. And here we again have another introduction of an idea into Judaism. Kos shel bracha istrich lemeve al chomesh etzba'in v'lo yatir. The kos shel bracha, the cup of blessing, has to be raised by a hand with 5 fingers and no more, representing these 5 languages of redemption, these 5 Yeshuos, these 5 types of redemption, which are the 5 leaves that protect the Shoshana. So this freewheeling thinking, this thinking, connecting 5 to 5 to 5, of the lily, of the fingers holding the kos. This is the holding the cup. This is the type of thinking that we're going to find throughout the Zohar. Um, um, and again, this has become a custom among Hasidic Jews to hold, and I kind of show my hand when I was taught as a child that the right way to hold a kos shel bracha, I have a cup here, is holding it in your hand with your 5 fingers like that. And why is that? From the Zohar. But think about the ramifications of that. Here we have the Zohar telling us how to perform a mitzvah, how to perform a commandment, something that we do in a way that represents one of these cosmic ideas of God's protection of Israel, lending significance to the actions we do with our bodies and giving it some spiritual significance, which it didn't have before. Prior to the revelation of the Zohar or the writing of the Zohar, wherever you assume the origin of the Zohar to be, prior to that, there was no such thought process. All of a sudden, this thought process, this idea, lending the spiritual quality to raising the cup of Kiddush, has become something, mainstreamed within Judaism over the years. There's many examples, but this is just one example right off the bat in the first few paragraphs of the Zohar. Kigavna de Shoshana de Yasval Chomesh Olin Takifin Dugma de Chomesh Etzban. It has to be raised in the same way that the Shoshana, that the lily, is resting also on the 5 strong leaves that give it support. V'Shoshana da'i kos shel bracha. That Shoshana is represented by the kos shel bracha. Me Elohim tinyana ad Elohim tilisa chomesh teven. And those are the 5 words between those two. The second word, Elohim, God, and the third. Mikanu la'ala. After that, or, then light is created, right? After the third Elohim, after establishing this relationship between God and Israel and the special protection, then, or, light comes to be. The isbrei v'iskeniz v'iskalil, because this light was created, and as we'll see later when it'll be a long way when we finish the introduction and start the Zohar's commentary on Bereshis. The Zohar's understanding of how the world was created in a flash of light. So this light, as soon as it was created, was gathered together, was wrapped up, and it was included bibrit, in the covenant. Now, the covenant is referring to that special relationship between God and Israel. It's also referring to the covenant of the Brit Milah, of the circumcision, right? Hahu da'ol b'shoshana, that Brit, of that circumcision, and this is a reference to the act of intercourse which creates a human being, da'ol b'shoshana va'apik bazara, that enters the Shoshana, the rose. So here you have this image of the act of creation, of an act of sexual intercourse, right, as the light that is contained within the Brit, within the covenant, within the circumcision, enters the Shoshana, enters the rose, v'apik pozara, and seed comes out, which then results in a normal intercourse, in the creation of a human being, in this case, the creation of the world. V'da ikri eitz osepri asher zarabo, and this is what's called a tree that makes fruit because there is seed within it. As we know, the fruit on a fruit tree arises from the flower, from the blossom, and and therefore the Zohar views it in this way. Vahu zera kayama b'os bris mamash. And if, in case you didn't understand it, the Zohar emphasizes this is absolutely what it means, that it is contained within the os bris, in the sign of the covenant, which is the circumcision. And then we're going to complete this first chapter with the next couple lines. Ukema diyukna de bris. And just like the form of the bris, of the covenant, Isdira, was formed or created by Arbeinu Train Zivugin, in an action of 42 acts of sexual intercourse, right? Hahu Zara, that's how this seed became created. Where it gets this 42 from is clearly a reference to the 42 letter name of God, which is mentioned in the Talmud once in the Tractate Kedushin 71a, right? And it's that 42 letter name of God which shows up in the Zohar and other places. It's with that with which God created the world. Um, and the Zohar views this as 42 acts of intercourse. Kach izdira shema gelifa mifarash, just like it was created with those 42 copulations, right? So too, it's the name of God, right? The ineffable name of God, which is written out with Barba'in Utrein Aspon, with 42 letters, the Ovada de Bracious, with which God created the world. So here we have chapter 1 of the introduction. There's many chapters in the introduction alone, but here we learn a little bit about getting an idea of how the Zohar introduces these concepts. There are just so many things to say, so many things to think about, but all of these concepts and ideas, as you can see, are ones which kind of stimulate the mind to start making these types of connections, making these connections through numbers, looking at the verses and seeing deeper meaning behind them, and the imagery which the Zohar is introducing is a totally new, and it kind of injects this tremendous amount of energy, this tremendous amount of spiritual energy, of imaginative energy into understanding the verses as we read them. All of a sudden, they come alive. They come alive with these powerful, and in this case, erotic images that we didn't see before, that we didn't know before. And hopefully, I appreciate, of course, that you're here today, that you're watching or listening to this, and whatever place you're listening, whether it's as a podcast or whether you're watching online on YouTube. But I'm going to continue with chapter 2. As of right now, I can't commit to a specific time when I'm going to be doing these. Maybe there will be a time when we can make this a regular class, so we can do this by a live stream. But so far today, I'm just going to promise to, when I have a chance to do the next chapter and be prepared for it in my busy life, I will continue. So stay tuned and you will see more. Thank you so much for participating. I wish you all a wonderful, wonderful day.